Hi, this is Greg Kerr, the Senior Print and Digital Media Instructor here at Eloquo, and I'm going to talk to you about Adobe Touch Apps and the Creative Cloud, so moving from mobile devices to desktop devices. On the desktop, I'm going to use Adobe InDesign, Creative Cloud, Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator. Acrobat is not quite part of the Creative Cloud, but it's always around, so we may see a little bit of Acrobat, both on the desktop computer and also on the mobile device. And I'll be using the 2017 versions of each of the software, of each of the CC software. Now on the mobile devices, I'm going to use Adobe Capture, and I'm going to start with Adobe Capture. I'm also going to focus and show you a lot of features that are in Adobe Comp. As I'm running through the software, I'll describe their uses and what they're for. In the Photoshop family, there's Photoshop Mix, Photoshop Fix, and Photoshop Sketch. Sketch is where you can create illustrations that are raster-based and load them over to your desktop computer in Photoshop, or even just finish them and share them entirely on your mobile device or with your Creative Cloud account. Fix and Mix have Photoshop features, in fact a lot of famous Photoshop features. So in Photoshop Mix you can do healing, and you can do spot correction, and you can do photo enhancements. In Photoshop Mix you can work with layers and knock out backgrounds and features like that on your mobile devices. Adobe Illustrator Draw enables you to draw on your mobile device and of course integrate with Illustrator, or of course just complete the entire composition on your mobile device, upload it and share it. Preview is a really simple app that works with Adobe Photoshop, and I'll demonstrate that quite briefly. And when I finish a project in InDesign, it may become an EPUB, so that means Adobe Digital Editions may also be something to discuss or have a quick look at as well. But mainly the focus is going to be between Capture and Comp, with a bit of the Photoshop family thrown in. And these are the things I'd like to get started with. In the next video, I'm going to show you my phone with Capture running, and I'm going to get started with the mobile apps. I'm also going to get started with the entire project, however, not actually. This will be first, and I'll start the entire project off in Adobe Illustrator and make sure I'm set up to share some assets across my Creative Cloud, or of course some assets across the mobile devices as well. So we're getting started right here in Adobe Illustrator CC. Now I'm signed in Illustrator with my Creative Cloud account. I'm further signed in all of my apps with the very same account. That's all apps on the desktop. That's of course all apps on mobile devices. I've got a client that asked me to do a small series of icons and arrange them, and I'd like to make sure they're available to use when I'm using a mobile device, and even show the client possibly from my mobile device. And further, I'd like to be able to use them throughout all my accounts, right? So I'd like to use them in all of my apps. I'd like to use them in Illustrator. I'd like to use them in Photoshop. I'd like to use them, of course, on the mobile device. So I'm going to add these icons to a library. So, of course, I'm going to open the illustration. And once it opens, I'm going to go straight to the libraries. Now the CC libraries, or they're called CC libraries in InDesign, the rest of the software just calls them libraries because they didn't have libraries prior, right? So the CC libraries are right here as, again, an icon that looks like the Creative Cloud. You can always open them from the window menu if they're not open, but they are open by default in the Creative Cloud desktop apps. I've been working with a library in Adobe Animate. Animate is the new Flash. It no longer exports the Flash format or the old SWF SWF format. It now exports HTML5. It's actually pretty exciting stuff. So I've been working with this library in that software, and this library is available for me to work with right here, of course, as you can see. I can work with this in InDesign too. I could work with this anywhere in my account. I have my libraries synced. But instead of using this library, I'm going to create a new one. So I'm just going to go to the menu of the panel and choose a new library. So create new library. The new library, I'm just going to name it right here in the panel. It doesn't open a dialog that floats. It's just right here in the panel, as you can see. I'm just going to name it BOC, and again just simply 01 to keep it nice and simple. BOC means Birds of Canada. That's who my client is. That's what these icons are quite obviously about. That's even the name of the file I'm working on. It's the BOC icons, Birds of Canada. Okay? So I'm just naming it after the client or after the project, of course. I'm going to say create. I'm going to say create, and I have an empty library to work with. Now it's asking me to drag and drop assets. I can use these particular illustrations either as a whole or of course individually or even just parts of them. But it's not just of course graphics or artwork that you can add into libraries, and that's any image or any artwork at all. You can add in artwork, you can add colors to be able to sync colors across your apps, which is really wonderful and really, really easy. But I can sync colors. I further not only can sync the colors, but I can also, of course, work with even text styles. Now, the text styles don't work on mobile devices because there really are no fonts, although there is kind of a way around using Adobe Typekit. But specifically throughout my desktop apps, I can sync font styles as well. So there's a lot of assets we can share. The types of handy things you really need to share are parts of these libraries. So I'm going to start adding these assets in individually. I'm just using a selection tool, and I'm just going to use a drag and drop. Now, as the items add in, they're uploading to my account, so they are stored on Adobe Server as part of my account. Now, they're named just simply Artwork 1, Artwork 2, etc. I could rename them, of course, but to save time, I'm just going to leave them with their default names. And I'm just adding them left to right, top to bottom, as you can see. Now, of course, I'm adding it. They're showing up in the library in the opposite order, but I'm okay with that. As long as they're in the library, I'll be pretty happy. And finally, I'm going to add all of them together as, again, a single item. Or let's try that one more time. There we go for artwork 10, all of them together. There we go. Right, so now these assets are available in the library. Now if I switch and just show you that I can also, of course, maybe make a selection of some artwork. This is just using the white arrow tool, the direct selection tool, because these items are grouped and I wanted to select the circle underneath the bird illustration. So I just selected it with the white arrow tool. Note that from this plus sign, I also could choose to add the graphic, which of course I've already done, and dragging and dropping would add the graphic. But note they're also offering me that choice, a chance to add the fill color as well. So that means I can add the fill color into my library also. Stroke is not mentioned as available because this object doesn't have a stroke. If you look over on the left side near the bottom, you'll see that this item uses a brown fill but uses none for the stroke. If there was a stroke, they would be offering me to add the stroke color as well to the library. So I can add a lot of assets, but I'm pretty happy with what I currently have. If I'm working with a lot of assets as well, I can open and close these sections to work with. If necessary, you make sure you sync your libraries. Now mine's currently saying it's up to date, so my library is updating and up to date throughout the rest of my account. However, you may have to click this button to make sure it's synced. You'll be prompted to click this button if necessary. Now that I have this library, I could go to any other app, including my mobile device, and switch to this library. So note if I go to, let's say, Adobe InDesign, where I have a project that I'm working on, and I have an empty page to work with, I could either use the assets I was working with in Flash, for example, this fun drawing here, again, something that I actually did draw in Flash, and I'm now using it here in Adobe InDesign. It's vector-based artwork. It's the same as Illustrator. It was a symbol I was animating in Flash, but I can add it here, and of course, considering InDesign has animation tools, I can animate it here as well. Or I could switch libraries to the one I just created back in Adobe Illustrator, and I can start working with these elements as well. Okay. So that's again how it works. Now further, it's not just that I can edit and work with these items. I could add new things into this library here in InDesign as well. So if I'm working with elements, I can add them in, and that means I could use them in other projects I'm working with in InDesign or elsewhere. Notice that in the links panel, these are being listed as cloud items. So again, the status is okay. They are listed as cloud links is what they're being listed as. They also have a cloud icon in place of the standard link symbol that you normally have, of course, in the upper left corner. Now here's a neat feature. I can modify features as well. If I were to edit the original, meaning in the library, I can double click this item and that will return me to Adobe Illustrator. I'll just switch to Illustrator here as it's blinking. And what's happening here, here's the original artwork open. Notice again it's an 8.5 by 11 page. This is the original artwork I was working with named BOC Icon, so I'm going to close that. But this item is called Artwork 10, which is the name of the library object. It's a temporary element, but of course I could make a change. Now by making a change, that could be anything. I could just select and decide to start changing the color of objects. So maybe this becomes a different brown color or so, right? Or a slightly different color. I'm using a lot of colors already, so let's just see if something is available that's not too similar to the others, but also not so garish. That's very similar to the others right there. Yeah, that kind of works. Stands out as yellow. If I save this, of course, what I'm doing is I'm saving the actual artwork within the library. And by doing so, that means, of course, if I then have a look at my library, and just say window and library at any time inside Adobe Illustrator or anywhere else, even though I don't have a document open, I have the library. Note that in the preview of the library, the icon appears here as yellow, of course. Now, the original icon down here is still brown, so maybe I'll update this artwork and return it to the original. But note that, again, it's yellow. But importantly, if I switch back to Adobe InDesign, the link is going to update here as well. Now, like every other link, you may be prompted to update it, but this was all in real time, and it linked and updated right away, as you can see. And that also means if I create assets in InDesign, I can use them in Illustrator. And if I, of course, double-click them, they will edit in InDesign as small snippets. I can create assets in Photoshop by dragging and dropping as well, and edit them, and they will edit in Photoshop and edit across. Right? So anything you want to reuse, feel free to. These elements will be available to me when, of course, I switch to my mobile device, which will be next. I'd like to show you how Adobe Capture works. Alright, so this is my iPhone, and I'd like to show you Adobe Capture. I like to use Capture on my phone because it's pretty mobile, of course. Now, of course, that's Alfie, the Rottweiler, and again, that show him off quickly. But I'm now switching just to my phone, and note I have Adobe Capture running. It's the icon down in the bottom right corner. Now if I select it, I'll point in I am, of course, signed in with the same account as I am back in Adobe Illustrator and InDesign, etc. So that means that library I created is available. Both libraries you saw from Adobe back in Adobe Illustrator are available here. Now first up, I'm just going to switch quickly to my camera just to show you that I'm also working with a sketch here. So I'm just back from a meeting, and quite simply the client and I, we sat down and we just sort of talked about a general layout. So I've got a thumbnail here. It says it's going to be a 4:3 layout. It's going to appear on an iPad as a general option, as a presentation on an iPad. It's going to be an interactive layout, and this is sort of a thumbnail of the first page. So I know where the title is going to go. I know there's going to be some text below the title, as you can see my quick thumbnailing options here. And then of course I'm going to use those same icons I showed you. Right? So I'm going to use those very same icons across the bottom. I've got a picture to of course put in the upper right corner, and I'm going to use a Facebook, LinkedIn, a Twitter icon as well, links to those items, and then further of course just simply the Birds of Canada logo appears down in the bottom right corner. So just wanted to show you that I'm working from a thumbnail sketch. So as I'm working, I'm going to creating a layout from those ideas that we see here. Now let's return to the Capture app. Now, of course, I don't have anything really set up in my library to work with, so I'm going to get started here. Now, specifically, I have a printout of those icons. I sat down with the client and we went over the icons and we talked about them, and we talked about, again, what we're going to work with. For example, they told me to put the color from yellow back to brown. So simply that's set it up as an option. So we're going back to brown for that icon. But further, I've got a printout I'd shown the client, and we've gone through those options. But I've got some colors printed out here that I'd like to work with and have available on my mobile devices, or even available anywhere in the Creative Cloud. So that's what I'm going to have a look at. Note that here I can create either shapes. So this is just across the top of the app. I can create shapes. I can work with patterns. Patterns, again, are photographic based. They can be used as backgrounds in Photoshop with Photoshop's pattern tools. Here are colors. Here are brushes. I could create brushes from photographs and also use them in Photoshop. Looks are for Adobe Premiere, and that can be used for color correction. And if you're outdoor in the daylight, you can save a particular look, which is a lighting style, and then later apply it to a series of video clips. And of course apply the same look to the video clips so they have the same common look and feel. They look like they were shot all at the same time. But colors is what I'm really looking to work with. I'm also going to show you shapes while we're talking about Adobe Animate here. Now, first up, I said Adobe Animate because that's the library I have open. I'm going to switch to the library I just created. So just note at the top, it says the name of the library I was last working with, Animate CC, where there are also no colors, but I'm going to switch to the Birds of Canada 01 library that you saw me create back in Illustrator. As soon as I created an Illustrator, it was available here to work with. I'm going to press the plus sign down at the bottom. I could use the color wheels and sliders, which are the same color tools that are available on the Adobe Color Themes website or the Adobe Color Themes tools built into the desktop apps. But instead, I'm going to use my camera because right here on my keyboard in front of me, I have some colors. Note that it's trying to auto-find colors, but I can click and hold on any of these dots and move them into place. So they actually sample the colors I do, in fact, want to work with. As soon as I start moving the dots as well, it freezes. It pins the colors and freezes it so I can move them in place and the photograph no longer moves around. Or even though I'm moving my hand around, I'm no longer moving features around. So quite simply, I'm sampling these colors. Now, I could be sampling colors from anything. I could be sampling colors from a poster. I could be in an art gallery and stealing colors from the masters, for example. I could be in my garden and just inspired by something that's growing there. We could sample colors from absolutely anything your camera can point at. I just happen to be using a printout that the client worked with. Or the client therefore liked. So now that I've got the colors sampled, I'm going to press the center button down at the bottom to again simply not only take the pictures but load these colors in. I can further use these sliders here to edit them, and note they're showing me the hex values for the colors. They're showing, of course, the RGB values for the colors as well. I could even switch to the CMYK values, or I could switch, of course, to lab values. It's just giving me information about the color to work with. Now that I like what I have, I'm not going to make any changes or modifications. Now that I like what I have, I'm going to say next, and therefore these items are available. Color Theme 1 seems like a pretty good name. It's saving into the right library, so that's set. Make discoverable means I can work with it. So at the very bottom it says Save Color Theme, and I'm going to press that, and these colors are now available to work with in my Creative Cloud. So they're now available. I can work with them, and anywhere I'm working, again, throughout the changes and the other things that I'm going to switch to, the other apps I'm going to switch to, I'm of course going to use some of these colors. If I switch to shapes, I could take a picture of a sketch, for example, or a picture of a very finely rendered drawing, something either rough or finely rendered. Finely rendered would be better, but I can take a picture of a sketch or a drawing, vectorize it, and make it available for Photoshop or Illustrator, which I think is pretty terrific as well, or make it available to other apps that are on my mobile device because it'll be saved as a shape in my library. So I'm going to create a shape here. I've already got a picture taken, so I'm not going to take a picture live. I took the picture earlier today, so I'm going to use this photograph. So I'm going to press the plus sign at the bottom, and instead of using the camera, I'm going to instead access my library. So simply down in the very bottom on the right, that's showing me my library. It's actually showing me the last photo taken, which was the photo that I was sampling the colors out of. As I was sampling the colors, we took a picture as well. It's actually trying to sample my keyboard currently, and it wants to actually vectorize my keyboard. However, I'm not going to take that picture. I'm just going to go quickly to my phone's library. I'll go to the camera roll. Now, of course, I had other options, but I'm going to go straight to the camera roll. And if I go into my photo stream here, where I have a lot of photographs, lots of pictures of Alfie, of course, and lots of pictures of guitars. But here is a sketch that I took a picture of earlier. So now, what it's doing is it's going through the property of vectorizing. I have a contrast item that allows me to fill in more of these areas, is what it does. So I'm going to go through these settings right here, and I'm going to then capture it. Now in the next step, they're asking me if I want to remove anything. So I'm going to remove with just my finger. Oops, I did a bit too much, so let's do an undo. Very, very bottom right corner is an undo. I'm going to just simply scrub over these areas. Note they turn light gray, and you can even see where my finger's touching, of course, on the app. It's showing a highlight of it. I'm just taking out the parts of the book on the left and right side, just leaving the illustration itself, of course, just a little bit. Right? Of course, that was also a bit too much, so note I can do undo. So as soon as I touch the other artwork, it's getting rid of most of it. So I'm getting rid of the elements on the right and left side I don't want. They've grayed out. They're not going to be part of this artwork. And I'm simply being very careful to make sure I'm getting the inside part. Right? And then further, After doing so, I can then move to the next step, is to erase these features. Okay, and then I'm going to say next from the corner here. Okay, and next is actually vectorizing and rendering it. So again, I quite like the appearance, so I'm going to say next again. Okay. And now I have a shape in my library as well. I'm going to say Save Shapes. They're asking for a name. I just said Shape 1. So note that if I switch over to colors, I have some colors to work with, and I can start saving up lots and lots of color themes. Note that this library now has shapes to work with as well. So if I'm switching between apps and switching around between other features, well, can we work with these elements? Right, so I'm just switched back to Adobe Illustrator, of course. And can I work with these features? Well, let's create a new Illustrator document here. So just create a nice simple Illustrator file. I'll switch over to, let's say, mobile, as far as the preset goes. I'm going to use just a standard iPad size, not the new big fancy iPads, so I'm going to work simply 1024 by 768. Okay. And I'll use RGB color, of course. Now my library should have synced, so what I just did in real time back on my phone, well, these features should be available to work with. So if I'm working with objects, of course, these objects are just rectangles, right, that have a white fill and a black stroke. My stroke is the active color. I'm just duplicating them with the Alt key, Option on the Mac, of course. And here are some color themes, and saved along with my artwork, here's a graphic. Right? So of course that means I can start using these colors on the artwork, of course. Let's just select objects and note that I can use these colors. I can save them by swatches. I can work with them, of course. Now I'm in Illustrator, but I could be in any Creative Cloud app. Or next up, you'll see, of course, you'll be able to save these or work with these on the desktop, on the mobile applications as well as the desktop applications. Okay. And here's the artwork to work with as well. Now that I've added it, it's not linked back to this item in Illustrator. It's not a link here in Illustrator, it's just artwork, and that will allow me, for example, to start actually creating artwork. Let's zoom in on this a little bit here. And specifically, if I wanted to start working with this, well, maybe I continue to use the same colors, but with this item selected, this artwork selected, I'm going to say Object. I'm going to convert this to Live Paint. By converting to Live Paint, it means I can paint inside these areas, of course, if I switch to the Live Paint bucket tool below the Shape Builder. So it'd be a matter of selecting a color. Sorry, I've already changed the color of that object. I'll make sure I have nothing selected for easier use. But I can then switch to a color, use the Live Paint tool to start painting inside the center there, of course. Actually, let's just use a standard library of colors. Again, I can add those elements in, but let's just note that I can start working with the artwork and start changing it and working with what you saw was a sketch in my photo library on my phone, a live picture that I just took. Or again, I've now added it into Illustrator and I'm now just finishing it and starting to work with it here in Adobe Illustrator, and turning it into regular artwork like anything else that you draw or create in Illustrator. Started this life on the phone as a shape to work with. Now I've got, again, something that's very much like vector artwork, all created and all ready to go. I could, of course, even start grabbing the white arrow tool and start touching up the paths, or I could grab the eraser tool and start erasing sections that I don't want. Right? Anything along those lines that you can do in Illustrator or think of in Illustrator, I can now do to this artwork. Alright, so I've switched over to Adobe Photoshop here, and in Photoshop I've got a photograph here the client's asked me to work with. It's a person and a bird. The background is, of course, just someone's backyard. So I can't believe this predator or this bird is in someone's backyard or that close to it, but this is the photograph I was given to work with, so I am working with it. Now what I have done is I've extracted the foreground. So of course there's a transparency setting here, and I've extracted the the gentleman and the bird from the background. It's not a composite picture. Simply, again, they were that close in the original photograph. The picture has been saved down to a fairly low resolution. It's 1024 by 768. It's 72 ppi. But I'm using on Photoshop's selection tools to extract the background is what I've done. And that means I do have, again, simply the background set up here. And I've blurred it a little bit for a bit of depth of field, but I also have a more natural setting, or simply a better background that's also blurry, of course, for depth of field, but something that looks a little more natural. And I'm previewing this currently on the screen, but I'd like to know, in fact, what it looks like on an iPad. I'd like to know what it would look like as part of my digital presentation. So I'm currently working just on my desktop computer, but my iPad's available. I'd like to see it, and I'd like to see what's available. Now, a couple things. Here is Photoshop, of course, and here's the Animate library we saw earlier, but of course here's the Birds of Canada library, where those colors and that artwork that I've been working with is available right here in Photoshop, in fact. So maybe I even select this top layer, and I grab some of this artwork, right, these vector elements from Illustrator, and I start working with them, of course. As a vector smart object. There we go. And simply make it a little bit larger. Move it up into position. Let's say we rotate it a little bit. And I'm currently not scaling it constrained, so let's make sure that I am. There we go. I was just pressing the constrain button at the top. After applying it, I'm of course maybe going to quickly add in something like a drop shadow or so. So let's make the settings a little bit bigger on this drop shadow, a little bit larger so we can see. I'm going to increase the size so it's a bit fuzzier. And if you've never seen this before, move this layer style window out of the way, click right on the artwork, and you can pick and move the drop shadow up. Play around with the angle and the distance. The angle and the distance are automatic if you just pick the shadow up and move it somewhere else, of course. Let's lower that opacity currently, move it a little bit more. There's a lot of other styles, of course, but I just wanted to add in the very famous and classic drop shadow style appearance. So now that I've been working on this item, as I mentioned, I want to preview it. I want to see what it would look like on a mobile device. This is a graphic I'm going to be working with. So specifically, right here is the device preview. Now the device preview is going to look for my devices that are on the same Wi-Fi system or that are plugged in, one of the two. I'm currently on the same Wi-Fi with my mobile device that I'm on here as well. Okay. And I'd like to, of course, get this to sync together. I'd like to preview this item. Now this is based on having preview open on your device as well. So if we actually switch to my device right here, this is my iPad, right? So this is the iPad, not the iPhone this time. I have a folder full of Adobe Touch apps, and note that preview is right there. Once I launch it, it's the same account. Okay, it's the same account and it's the same Wi-Fi, but note they're also saying I can connect, of course, but with a cable as well, but it's saying I'm successfully connected. So back in Photoshop quickly, note that it's listing my iPad, the resolution and size the iPad is currently using, and it's saying I'm connected to that device. If I'm not, then I've got an option here to connect or look for new devices, but it will connect to your device on the same Wi-Fi or devices that are connected to the computer. If I then switch back to that app, note that again, here it is. This is my iPad again, and now I'm just previewing this item. So I could actually, I'm just pinching and zooming, of course, and looking at it and seeing what it looks like on the device. Of course, if I have a client visible or so, I can give them the device. And the thing is, it's live time, in that if I actually start making changes, for example, if I start hiding elements or making changes to items, so I could, of course, show or hide things, right? So different backgrounds, show or hide. And again, as I do so, this is going to update on the device is what will happen. This will refresh and update on the device right away. So as soon as I switch back to the device, it updated. So that means I could be walking around showing people things on my iPad and showing them specifically what's going on over in Photoshop, for example. Or someone could be holding the iPad and giving me directions and showing me or giving me a review or feedback, or I could just simply be wanting to look and see what it looks like on the iPad or so. So that's Adobe Preview. It works with Photoshop CC, It works with, again, your mobile devices. Right? I'm using Apple products, but of course if you're on Android devices, all of this works the same way.